Hi, welcome to the webinar. The topic is what practical ideas could be deployed to our B2B marketing strategy given all the chaos that has been created by COVID, right? Just to introduce myself, I'm Ravi. I am one of the co-founders of GenY Medium, and I've led a lot of engagements on behalf of GenY Medium with B2B brands. And these are across sectors of IT services, manufacturing, you know, focused on small and medium-sized buyers as well. So there is a lot of spectrum there. Also, we've run programs for B2B brands uh, overseas, and therefore are getting a lot of inputs, questions, and learnings from the changes that have been occurring in 2020. And basis all of those practical insights, some conversations with industry leaders, as well as extensive reading, we have put together some material which might be useful for all practitioners of B2B marketing. So with that, I will just start. We will be sure not to use these terms like unprecedented, uncertain, trying times. It's already very apparent. There is no need or value to repeating those. We would look at the path forward. What we could do to make it better is the sole focus of our webinar. The flow is that we would set up the context, which you're very well aware, but some data has been collected from various sources, which will help you understand how other people, especially B2B buyers, are seeing the situation, and that would provide us with some inputs. The other is at a high level, what are things which are favorable and what are things which are unfavorable in the B2B marketing context. And finally, we will jump into a variety of practical adjustments that we should consider making in all aspects of our program, which spans what we offer, the kind of communication style we use, the media mix that we use, pricing models, and so on. Right. So this is not just related to digital marketing or traditional marketing, but various aspects of B2B marketing. We will have about 10 minutes for Q&A. You can jot the questions down in the Q&A section as as I described before. The context is very clear, and we would try to look and weave connect the dots between what is happening and how does it impact us as B2B marketers. We'd look at bias sentiment, spends, and behavior. Overall, right at the onset of the pandemic in March 2020, there were hints of pessimistic, economic outlook by B2B, especially amongst B2B marketers. And this is a poll conducted, around March, April time with B2B businesses. And as you can see that there is some markets which are very pessimistic, for example, Japan, and other markets which were not very, as pessimistic. In fact, they were quite optimistic, which is India. And this sentiment, market sentiment, has been evolving as the situation has evolved around us, right? This is more India data. You would see that the sentiment was more or less steady around March, April timeframe. But as we progress from the into the H1 of the year, this optimism is not quite held up, right? You'd see that chief strategy officers have seen declining optimism from mid-March to end March. And then in April, the data suggests that companies, this is all B2B buyers, B2B decision makers, are wanting to reduce their spends across the board, by up to 25%. And this is constituting a majority of them. And as we progress into May, the pessimism is even more. So almost 50% of the companies who are in the B2B buying segment, and this is only a slice of that, this is purely software related buyers, almost 50% are not very optimistic, right? So the situation has evolved over the last 3 months, from March, where there was some optimism, to May, where there is more pessimism and caution. And what seems to be the theme is that we maintain the status quo on things that are already there. So if customers have existing vendors, they want to have no change. If they have spends, they mostly they do not want to change. They would like to, it's like a wait and watch situation. And like all the costs, obviously, the real indicator of buying sentiment or B2B sentiment is the actual marketing investments. And you would see that across the countries, there have been a reduction in marketing spends. The lowermost bar is the percentage of companies interviewed who would say that they would definitely reduce the marketing spend in 2020, right? So we have just put together the headwinds and tailwinds that we are seeing, and we'll discuss each one of those in detail, right? So the good things that are happening first, B2B marketing programs are yielding results in terms of meetings, right? Decision makers are giving meetings, and that's a good sign. The second is that customers are showing openness to explore new things, right? Which is also a very good sign. If you have a new idea, new proposition, new software, etc., it is being evaluated. It is, people are not just shutting their thought process on that. The third important point is that customers are listening to a pitch or an offering which talks about efficiency or enables them to save costs. So that is obvious given the cost pressure, and that is one kind of communication or nature of communication that is driving business, and especially meetings, right? One good thing, especially for incumbents or good brands, are that the buying process has been simplified. So people, would evaluate 8 to 10 vendors and then shortlist 5 or 7, and then there would be a RFP and so on. That process has been simplified by focusing on only a very few select providers, which can be an advantage or a disadvantage. But let's assume that if we do all other things right, and we are in the buying process itself is simplified. For the usual requirements, so I'm not talking about new requirements, known, tried, and tested is the in thing, right? So the buyers are not looking to, experiment, not looking to evaluate too many options and so on. The known brands stand to gain here, given that there is reluctance to, experiment and so forth. In contrast, what is not working really well, right? So while meetings are happening, the decision making is very slow, right? It takes forever to get a decision or to the next step in our discussions. The second is that customers are preferring to maintain the status quo with existing vendors for the usual things, right? So unless you have a very new idea or you show the potential to save a lot of cost or drive significant efficiencies, customers are not preferring to engage in that kind of a discussion. right? So an example would be an accounting firm providing accounting services to its customers. If they are an incumbent, um, you know, a new player would find it very difficult to engage in opportunity discussion with the buyer. There is another point that we've collected as a signal, which is that any pitch which says we will help you increase revenues does not work, right? Uh, People would much rather talk about saving costs versus an increase in revenue. There is another complication in the buying process, which is there are many subjective layers now to the decision making, right? Given that there is no face-to-face interaction as before in an informal setting, and therefore, trust, loyalty, past associations, those are subjective elements which make a big difference today versus just a few months back. Anything which requires a high amount of commitment, either in terms of time or costs, are out. So this is another factor to consider. And these are very broad-based observations across customer types. So if your ticket size are very different, are outliers, or your sectors are very specific, you would see different trends. But this is more or less the trends that we are seeing. In all, the decision makers' behavior has changed a bit. It's become more cautious and risk averse, and non-committal would be the right word. It's more focused on survival and about making do, but not being locked into a long-term contract or a very expensive contract, right? And the human element here is that decision makers, given that they are preferring to interact with a very few clients in a pitch, it is more about straightforwardness and positivity. So this is something that we can take away when we discuss our marketing communication and how we need to change it in the B2B context. Given all of this situation, the evolving buying sentiment, which is increasingly pessimistic or about maintaining the status quo, and the headwinds and tailwinds that we discussed, the next few slides would only talk about what can we do to improve our marketing program's chance of success versus where we are today, right? Some of it or many of it you would already have implemented or might not be applicable, but there are a few I hope you would like and would like to implement, right? So to start with, it is about restating the marketing objective and to internalize it for the remaining half of 2020. The key theme that we have heard everywhere, right, is customer retention is the new customer acquisition. If you can hold on to the existing customers and improve your quality of engagement and all engagement metrics with your customers, that will be the key for doing really well versus today, status quo in 2020. And the implication of this is that we need to balance our efforts, resource allocations between demand generation and retention, right? And this has implication on even reorganizing the sales force or marketing teams to allocate a higher mind share for connecting with existing customers, especially the senior leadership who could connect and make a very positive impact. Whenever there are genuine conversations to better understand the customer's need, given the changes that are happening, there are always some new opportunities which crop up. So those conversations should happen, and the time allocation to pursue new opportunities with new customers versus new opportunities within existing customers, that needs to be rationalized. That is a point. A food for thought here would be, if you want to understand whether you're doing this well or not, is that beyond your monthly newsletter, have you done anything more meaningful to engage with your existing customers, right? And if not, then probably a rethink is required into increasing your salience and presence and engagement with your existing customers, because the informal catch-ups or the meetings and so forth are not possible in today's time. The other aspect that we've tried to look at is how can we modify our offerings or the way we present to them. So the key here is to understand and go back to the buying behavior change, right? Risk aversion and risk aversion rather, and also not not focusing on anything which is very high commitment, long term commitment, right? So this will help us understand if there is a possibility to retailer our offerings itself. And if you look at the question that you need to ask is that, has your own pitch, right, which you were using in 2019, has that changed in any manner in the current year, right? What is the new thing that you're going to your prospects with? And remember that any new thing will have an open hearing from the buyer, going back to the earlier point, versus if you go with the same thing that is already being done by others and not contextualizing it to today, that might not be a good idea. So an example is a customer of ours who is in the IoT space, and they've created a new offering for existing customer type, which is to create a product for watching shows and sports together using web cameras and IoT applied to it, right? And that has started seeing traction with the customers because it is very contextual, and there are not many providers talking about it. In our own case, we have gone to customers who are seeing more traction on e-commerce, for example, and we have created an offering which is more talking about a new sales channel versus doing the same thing that we were doing in 2019 and more of that, right? And the reception to such ideas is much more positive versus the same old that we were doing a few months back. And therefore, if your pitch is exactly the same as it was in 2019, maybe there is a scope to bring about a change there. Some examples, although not a whole lot, is in the banking sector. There are banking programs that have been started very recently across the world, even in India, which is about helping businesses. The communication is changed, new products have been launched purely to enable business continuity using financing, right? So this is a very contextual, and the way it is being presented is resonating with consumers, and therefore such programs have become a very good success, right? All the IT services providers have tried to create verticalized offerings, understanding that various aspects of doing business, for example, let's say logistics or the technology function itself has been disrupted. So you would see the best uh, executors of B2B strategy have already created a very different pitch for 2020 versus what they had in 2019. This is an example from Cognizant, which has literally transformed their digital properties to cater to COVID situation. And some other players also are creating programs and initiatives and solutions which are very specific to these needs versus going with a plain vanilla IT services or solutions pitch. The sub element to this is how can we change the way we communicate. There are a variety of elements to it, but the most important things are Going back to the risk aversion and familiarity being very important for decision makers here, right? So your salience is very important, uh, and which directly helps to reduce the risk perception, right, associated with you as a provider of products or services. So a focus on brand communication and the frequency at which we do that is important. Probably we focus on a few brands, and I'll come to that later. But saturate the potential for salience and meaningful salience at that, versus doing a very expansive outreach with thousands of customers, right? So this is one important piece. The second is, what do we sell, right? The communication or the sales pitch of ours need to be changed as well. We need to focus on efficiency versus growth and offer more flexibility versus commitment, right? We'll come to this aspect of communication as well, which has implications on both offerings and pricing. Finally, how do we sell? So the buyers are preferring a very simple pitch. It is about all about simplification, and also some amount of contextualization when you create or send out a material or deck or your products to them. Finally, and this is very important given today, that when people are wishing wanting to meet only a few people and make a decision, and rather quickly, we need to enable them using digital assets, right? This could be a huge, a more expanded resource center if you have one, or for example, we have seen many consulting companies and other people playing in other B2B domains create verticalized resource centers as well, so that you can really understand and filter down, pin down to the right capabilities that you might be looking at, rather than you being directed to by somebody face to face or through a Zoom call and so on, and talking about that, right? So a digital overhaul of especially your assets like the website, the resource center and so on, will go a long way. This is some study done with B2B marketing professionals in the context of COVID by McKinsey, and which suggests that the number one used feature now versus before is the simple live chat, right? Which is helping people to research and filter down what they need. Buying enablement. So those people who are into products selling to mid-size or small businesses, e-commerce enablement, applications, etc., have become very important. There are people. One of our customers in the pharma services space has launched an app, for example, which helps customers track progress on their projects in real time, and that's a very good intervention which is being liked by the customers, for example, right? So these kind of interventions in the way we communicate and enable the buyer is extremely valuable. And the feedback to this question of self-serve versus directed has always been there. That trend was already there. This is not anything new. But in the case of the recent past, especially COVID, you would see that the preference for this has increased very significantly, as expected. The other elements, more subjective elements related to the way we communicate, is being thoughtful versus very aggressive. So some brands are over indexing on email communication and and things of that nature, because the other avenues have dried up and they are not able to do it, and that does more harm than good. It is better to send more personalized and contextual, thought out communication versus sending a similar communication as we were doing earlier, but more frequently, right? That is no compensation for the absence of face to face meetings and so on. We should also think about going back to the how we position our offerings, or how we make it more amenable in this time when people are looking for flexibility and there is a risk aversion. One way to engage in a conversation is to think about a very meaningful help and advice that we could provide and not bill for it, right? And that is something that people remember and appreciate, and probably not immediately, but probably a few months down the line, uh, your investments in advice and help that you have provided and which is a well meant advice as well, yields ROI, right? And that's something that is that works well, and probably if it's not being done, it's something that you should consider including. I'll shift gears to the change in our media mix itself now, and this is very contextual to B2B setup. This is some data you would have seen, a lot of recent data also, that the most effective, cost effective channel for B2B is in fact in-person meetings, events, and trade shows. If you look at the cost of doing it versus the number of conversions that happen, trade shows, in-person meetings, and events are the outlier here, and just followed by email as the biggest channel for actual conversions, right? And this is both at the top of the funnel and the actual conversions as well, right? So you would see, and that is the reason why it's natural that most of our B2B programs hinge around the events and conferences that we will either attend, sponsor, or create under our own brand name, right? But this is not working anymore for obvious reasons. And what people are doing is a variety of things, but they are moving the events to virtual events, which may not be a very effective idea. People who have done it have reported very limited success with it. A better idea would be to move to channels which are the next best alternative, and in this case, like we discussed, it is mostly email, enhancing inbound programs, search, social, so mostly digital, right? And if you look at the next best after referrals and trade shows and events, it is the conversions and leads happen mostly on digital channels. So digital could be the a place where you could direct your spends for. Within that, there is a further breakdown available. I will share more resources and reports right after the webinar is over, where you would understand how people are reallocating the budget within digital as well, mostly focused on content creation, digital content creation. The resource center that I talked about is where people are investing most, followed by finding alternatives to face-to-face events, for example virtual events and so forth, right? Given the event scene is out, people are canceling, most people have cancelled almost all the event participation programs they had or they had already decided on for the remaining of the year. And uh, while some people have decided to conserve cash and not utilize the budget elsewhere, there is almost 30-40% of people who are reallocating it to the other channels. The question is, what is the right channel? Our recommendation would be digital, because it is actually, even before pre-COVID, it was the next best channel in terms of ROI and results. This is just some illustration of how virtual events as a alternative is emerging. Like I said before, that this seems like the next best alternative to a face-to-face event, but it has a lot of limitations. Most business deals in face-to-face events happen very informally, right? And virtual events do not have that. right? And that's the reason why such one-to-one reallocation of budgets from face-to-face to virtual might not be a great idea. We would rather recommend doing some of these, but reallocating the spends to more digital connect options or investing in your digital assets and overhaul of your digital assets, given the situation. Finally, about pricing model changes. So it all goes back to providing assurances to the buyer who is not looking for taking any risk or committing long term, right? There is a model. This is by Accenture, and this is very COVID related as well. Different methods of providing flexibility. The key is, are we sharing risk and therefore reducing the risk to the customer because he's already risk averse, or not locking them into a long-term commitment, right? So all those rules that we have written about pricing and policies and so on, it might be a good idea to rethink and relook at that, so that we offer some risk sharing for the customer, some flexibility for the customer, and then shake hands on that, versus sticking to the exact old way that we were doing our pricing and so forth, right? So the options that are available are something like a try and buy kind of option, or in terms of delayed payments is one form of flexibility. Result based payments are another flexibility that we could offer, or breaking down the solution into more granular modules so that the must haves are taken care of in your basic offering, and there is a flexibility that the customer has to do an add on, right? So those are things that are yielding better results for B2B brands versus what it used to be earlier in 2019, right? Free pilots, try before you use, success based, and in the case that because of company policy or because of the structure, cost structures, etc., if you are unable to change the price, it is very important to invest more than earlier on brand salience, portray greater thought leadership, technology leadership versus your competition, in order to be able to command the same prices before, or the same rigid structure that you have to work with as before, right? So this is the trade-off that you have in terms of pricing versus investing in brand salience from your media budget. An important point that we've been asked quite a bit in the recent times is what kind of customers to focus on, right? And this relates to the marketing budget, cuts that you would have heard of, and also the fact that it is very difficult to get into certain kind of engagements where you're providing a very similar thing that is already being provided by an incumbent vendor. Therefore, a selection of customers is very important, and the key takeaway from the work in the last few months that we have found is that uh, you know one point we already made is that try and upsell and cross sell to current customers, by where, especially where you can provide some very good cost savings or efficiencies, right? So that is the first bet, or the best bet that you have. The other is to mine a few prospective customers deeper versus doing an expansive outreach, because you would not have the budgets to sustain the salience, the engagement across so many customers, whereas a few potential higher, relatively higher potential customers could be good. Investing in business intelligence tools. We use a tool called Bambura. I'm not sure whether you've used it, and our in-house tools as well. to gather business intelligence on who is looking for a particular service, right? Those could be very good investments to make. They are not very expensive as well, and can direct you to target the right customers, right? Who might be looking for the solutions and offerings you might have. So the point here is to focus very narrow and go from there, versus doing a very expansive outreach, increasing your contact base, database, geographies, and so forth, right? This might not be the right time to do that. There are some points on sales process adjustments, and some of these are very important. In fact, people, we know that we are using more digital means to do this versus the offline or traditional means to do it. And our expectation is that we might get similar results, but the effectiveness of non face-to-face methods on closing transactions is lower than the traditional means, and it has to do with years of practices that have been in place, or what the customers are used to. Therefore, the expectation that a replacement from offline to digital, for example, or live event to a webinar, for example, might not be a great idea. In fact, we've seen that to get the same progress from a prospect to an opportunity and to becoming a customer on using digital channels, you would probably need to deploy 3 times more a number of interactions before a deal is closed, versus what you could have accomplished face to face. So the key point here is that we should taper our expectation and not look for a direct replacement for the face-to-face meetings. Another important point is that between each such meeting, when we are on, let's say, meeting 3, and we need to go to progress to meeting 4, where you would do a price negotiation, you should deploy a lot of lead nurturing, which again, the theme would be addressing risk perceptions and associated with your brand. So anything which enhances the confidence of the customer in your brand, maybe get existing customer to talk about, or existing success story, or an award that you have won. Those kind of communications would help you progress from from the earlier stages of the funnel right to the closure of the deal. This is the last point that I had put, and probably one of the most important ones. All traditional B2B businesses have a large, team, and which is deployed as a field sales team, right, for meeting people face to face and so on. And there is an inside sales team which creates the pitch work, which does the research and so forth. And at this time, it is very important to become flexible and not work in silos. Redeploying the field sales force as inside sales might be a very good idea. It might require a lot of adjustment, but given that face-to-face meetings are not happening, redeploying them as into inside sales, or helping them train inside sales, might be a very good idea, versus retaining the same sales team structure as before. And motivation is very important. Remember the point on requiring 3 times the earlier effort to get the same result, right? And that will require a superhuman effort from the sales team to make a difference. And therefore, we should, as part of our marketing program, B2B marketing program, we should factor a lot of team interventions, get-togethers, and so on, even if it is virtual, are very important to keep the motivation going.